Right, so there we go. And we'll just bring up.
So you weren't able to moderate tomorrow, are you? So it's Lorraine who'll do it.
Oh, so Lorraine's going to moderate, not you?
I think so.
Okay. I mean, I'm happy to moderate as well because I'll be in the session.
Yeah.
And it just comes across better when it's someone who knows exactly what they're talking about and can sort of go, well, this is similar to what we've done and things like that. So, but
yeah, no, I think it's better to push Lorraine forward on that one because she convenes the bachelor degree course that it relates to, and yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so we actually can't see people's faces or anything like that. We'll only be able to see their names. So, yeah, any questions will come up through that chat window.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll explain that.
And you'll field the questions?
Yeah, I can field the questions. Okay, thanks for those who are joining us. We're just going to wait a few minutes, wait for a few more people to join us. So we'll probably get started in about 5. And yeah, if you have any questions, please put those in the chat window or the Q&A. The Q&A might make it a little bit easier for us to find them. But if anything comes to mind during the presentation, feel free to ask a question there. But we'll just give it a couple more minutes to wait for a few more attendees to join, and then we'll get ourselves underway. I think we might get ourselves underway. So I will just start with sharing up my screen here. And
So if you want to make a real impact in the world and you want to develop skills that make you very employable, then you might want to think about studying environment issues. Environment issues are core to a lot of the important challenges around the world. Challenges in how we feed people, how we have sustainable cities, how we manage bushfire, how we manage climate change, and so on. And it's a great opportunity to study environment issues at the ANU, because the ANU has the Fenner School of Environment and Society. In the school, we recognise that environment issues have got that dimension to do with the plants, the animals and the trees and the soil and so on, but they always also have a human dimension. That's the society part, and we bring both of those elements to anything we study. We have leading researchers in the school that are making a big difference in the world themselves, but also play a role in teaching the courses that we teach. So if you're really passionate about environment, we've got a degree just for you called the Bachelor's in Environment and Sustainability. And that's a course that focuses in the Fenner School but has opportunities in other schools. But actually, you might be more interested in doing a Bachelor of Science or Arts, or you might want to study law or politics and still bring some environmental perspectives into one of those degrees. And this approach is possible too. It's really easy if you're doing a Bachelor of Science to choose plenty of environment subjects and mix them up with a few others. But even those other degrees have generally got the flexibility to bring in courses from other schools. And we love having these students in our environment courses too. Either of these options are great, and the ANU is a great place to be doing them. I hope you think about studying environment at the ANU.
all right, thanks for everyone who has joined us this morning. Firstly, I just want to acknowledge that any First Nations people who are joining us today, and that here in Canberra, we're on Ngunnawal and Granby country, so we pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. This webinar will be recorded and recordings can be made after the event. So if you'd like to ask a question, you can make that in the Q&A tab, which is located at the bottom of your screen, or the chat window. Q&A tab will mean we can just go through one by one, but you can also, if you've got a statement or something, you can just put that out in the chat window as well. If you don't want your question or comment recorded, please contact the College of Science afterwards. I've put the email address there in the chat window. So we're about to hear from Professor Jamie Pittock. So he is an absolute expert on water. So he teaches at the Fenner School of Environment and Society, and looks at issues of environment, climate change and adaptation. He co-convenes the ANU Masters of Climate Change program, and his research focuses on environmental governance, adaptation, energy and sustainability, looking at the issues of water. Jamie also manages a research project on irrigation in Africa. So that's in the countries of Mozambique, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe, and looks at energy and food in the Mekong River region in Southeast Asia. Jamie's PhD examined integration between the management of freshwater ecosystems and responses to climate change, involving case studies from 9 different countries. Prior to joining the ANU, Jamie worked for WWF as the International Director for their Global Freshwater Program on conservation wetlands, water use in agriculture, river basin management. He also worked with WWF Australia on national environmental laws, looking at conservation of biodiversity, management of invasive species, and measures to support Indigenous and private conservation land managers. He's also worked in the Northern Territory and in Victoria. So if I'm going to hand over to Jamie, he's going to have a chat to us about the Murray-Darling River. It's a huge issue. I'm sure you've heard a lot about in the news, but what's behind the science there? What are the issues? Well, we'll hear from Jamie.
Peter, thank you. And welcome everybody this afternoon for this discussion about the Murray-Darling Basin. I'm just going to share my presentation with you. I'm planning to talk for about half an hour, and then hopefully we'll have some good time for discussion. So following on from Professor Cunningham's introduction, one of the really difficult issues that Australia is facing is how to manage water on the driest inhabited continent on Earth. And to begin, I'd like to start by acknowledging the 40 Indigenous nations who are the traditional owners of the Murray-Darling Basin, their elders past, present and emerging. And in particular, acknowledge that there's a lot of unfinished business in terms of the rights of Indigenous people, such as the Barkindji people here at Wilcannia, who have diminishing access to their traditional water resources here in the riverbed of the Darling River. The Murray-Darling Basin is a key issue to discuss because the rivers in the basin drain about 1/7 of our continent. The basin supplies water to about 3 million Australians. It's one of our most important agricultural areas, and it has very important biodiversity, plants and animals that as a nation we have committed to conserve. And of course, here at the Australian National University, we're located here in Canberra in the Murray-Darling Basin in the headwaters of the Murrumbidgee River. What I want to talk about is why Australians need to do a better job of managing the rivers and the freshwater ecosystems in the basin, why scientists like myself and others at ANU think that we should be speaking truth to power. What is the role of scientists and indeed science students in these governance issues that are often really contested? And then I want to highlight that by showing a few examples from some of my ANU students of research that's making a really big difference. So to begin with, the environmental health of the river basin is really poor. So when you look at the 19 different tributary catchments of the basin, this colour chart shows those that are in relatively healthy condition in green, right through to those that are in very poor environmental health in red. And those in red are river systems where the proportion of native fish is very low, generally less than 10%, where there are enormous water quality problems with issues like salinity and with cyanobacteria or algal blooms, and where the wetlands and the floodplain forests, the iconic red gum forests, are stressed. Now, this map really highlights why it's important that we have independent research at universities like ANU. Australia's state and federal governments actually cut funding to the monitoring program that produced this sustainable rivers audit in 2012, and since then there hasn't been a whole of basin process to monitor the health of the rivers. Now that's particularly surprising because since 2007, Australia's state and federal governments have allocated something like $13 billion to change the way these rivers are managed, to improve their health, to improve the health of not only the ecosystem, but the communities who live along these rivers. And in spending so much money, you would hope that there was an adequate monitoring program. And that's one reason why universities that can undertake research independently is very important to supply information to the community, to government decision makers, to help them make better choices. Managing rivers in Australia is not easy, and this is one indication of that. Australia has some of the most variable rivers in the world. This table just shows the ratio between low flows and high flows. And you can see here that the Darling River is possibly the most variable river in the world. And so government programs and community approaches to managing rivers here are very difficult if we want to secure water for agriculture and for towns, while also maintaining the health of the ecosystems. However, over the years, many of our political leaders have been badly misinformed and have got some very strange views about what is sustainable. This is just one example. Prime Minister Billy Hughes in 1920 saying, "I say deliberately that the possibilities of the Murray are not less than those of the Nile. I see no reason whatever why in the valley of the Murray there should not ultimately be as great a population as there is in the valley of the Nile." Now that is just delusional. The Nile River Valley currently is home to something like 320 million people, while the Murray-Darling Basin is only around 2 million people. And that's one reason why it's very important that those of us in the sciences and other academic disciplines engage our government leaders. There have been a number of government leaders who've been quite visionary, and Prime Minister John Howard is one. In 2007, he recognised that the previous way these rivers were managed, where the state governments had substantially independent approaches to managing their sections of the one river system, wasn't working, and nor was consensus-based decision making, where the best environmental standard was the lowest standard of the 6 governments. And so he instigated major reforms. He talked about nothing changing the basic facts of our continent. To quote Dorothy McKellar, a land of drought and flooding rains. He talked about the need to end the tyranny of incrementalism and lowest common denominator governance. That is, making stronger central decisions for sustainability. And as a result, he talked about introducing once and for all reforms to prevent economic and environmental decline. And so that led to a new national law where the federal government asserted a primary control over water allocations in the river system, and to the preparation of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan from 2012 that's due to run through to 2026. And the Basin Plan has some very sensible objectives to ensure that the people who live in the basin have sufficient and reliable water supplies, things like rural towns, that there are productive and resilient industries that depend on water, for example, our farmers, and that there are healthy and resilient ecosystems where the rivers are connected to the floodplain and where the river actually flows ultimately to the ocean, because these bring a lot of benefits for nature and for people. When the rivers spread out onto the floodplain, it helps trees like red gums to grow. Those are ecosystems that produce not only timber, but are also highly valued for tourism and recreation. When the river flows to the sea, it flushes out a lot of the salt from the river system and enables fish to migrate into the river, things that a great many Australians value. So a lot of the research that I oversee at ANU asks whether the governments are actually implementing the measures that they promised in the Water Act and the Basin Plan, and if not, what are the options to do it better? One thing that worries me is that many people seem to think that the Basin Plan is working very well, and I don't think there's a lot of evidence to justify that. So here's Philip Glyde, the Chief Executive of the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, saying, we know the Basin Plan is working, it is generating positive environmental outcomes and driving improvements in irrigation efficiency. And there's a group of scientists who say the environmental benefits are slowly but surely being seen. So there are some positive results from the 7 years of Basin Plan implementation so far. So one area that's improved is the value of agricultural product. So even though there is less water available for agriculture, because of the water market, many farmers are able to acquire water for use in higher value agricultural products that employ more people, that have got a greater monetary value. And you can see here that irrigated agricultural production in the Murray-Darling Basin has increased since the water reform started in 2007 and 2008. However, many environmental measures are not improving. So, for example, the condition of the floodplain forests along the river system has not improved. And this is data from the Murray-Darling Basin Authority's commissioned research. The numbers of water birds across, this is data for Eastern Australia, but focused on the Murray-Darling Basin, those water bird numbers are still declining. And when we look at some other environmental targets, for example, whether enough salt is being exported to the sea, the government's rolling target of 3 million tonnes of salt a year being flushed into the Southern Ocean, that's only been achieved in 1 year for which there is data. So why is it that the environmental targets are not being achieved? And if so, what can we do about it? Well, one reason is that some government leaders have changed the rules. And this is Barnaby Joyce when he was Deputy Prime Minister, talking about how we have taken water and put it back into agriculture so we could look after you, meaning the farmers, and make sure we don't have the greenies running the show. As an example, in 2012, the New South Wales government changed the rules to enable farmers to access more water from the Darling River in terms of having higher capacity pumps and being allowed to pump water when river levels were lower, in terms of not honouring the state government's commitment to protect environmental water flowing across the border from Queensland. And that contributed to the drying up of the Darling River that we've seen in recent years. I and my colleagues have been looking at issues around whether the environmental targets the governments have adopted are being achieved. This is a map showing 122 so-called hydrologic indicator sites that were used to develop the Basin Plan. And at each of these sites, scientists identified the kinds of flows that were needed to sustain the health of the ecosystem. So when my colleagues in the Wentworth group of concerned scientists looked at two key sites, one at Wilcannia representing the Darling River system, the northern rivers, and one at Chowla representing the whole of the river system, I looked to see whether these flow targets were being met, the so-called stream flow indicators. And basically for those that were meant to be achieved through managed release of water from dams, very few of those targets have been achieved. None in the River Murray system so far, and only 2 out of 3 in the Darling River system. Now, one reason for this could be that when the Basin Plan was designed, it did not make any consideration of potential losses of water due to climate change. This table shows CSIRO's assessment from 2008 of potential average surface water availability in 2030. And they suggested the amount of water available in just 10 years' time could be anything from 7% more through to 37% less. If there's less water, because the river systems lose water as they flow downriver in the Central Basin, that could mean that South Australia, at the end of the system, could end up with very much less water. And of course, during droughts, as we saw in 2009, that could be significantly worse on a year-to-year basis. So one of the key areas that my students have been looking at here at ANU is what does that mean in terms of conserving the wetland ecosystems in the river basin. When you look at the wetland ecosystems, this is a typical cross-section from CSIRO of the river system. We've got the river channel, and naturally in late winter and spring there would be high flows in the southern system, and so that water would spill out onto the floodplain. The floodplain gradually rises and different kinds of wetland ecosystems occur at different heights on the floodplain. So you've got the red gum forests here that need a flood once every 5 years or so, and then higher up on the floodplain, the black box eucalypt red gum forest, floodplain forests that might need watering once every 10 years. If that frequency of watering is not provided, then you can end up with the sort of situation from my photo here, from Psyche Bend near the River Murray, near Mildura, where salt accumulates, and when the wetland soils dry out, it can oxidise to form sulfuric acid. And so this water you see here is so acidic you could use it in a car battery, hypersaline, and you can see what that does to the health of the ecosystem. So the government agreed in 2012 with the Basin Plan to reallocate water for the environment, to reallocate about 10% of the average surface water flows. And they agreed to do this in a couple of ways. And so one of the key things they agreed to do was to reconnect the rivers to the floodplains by moving infrastructure that might be damaged by water out of harm's way, and by making agreements with farmers. So one of my students, Georgia Kahan, has done some really important research to basically explore why the Victorian and New South Wales governments haven't actually implemented what they promised since 2014. What she found was that the governments positioned these initiatives entirely in terms of costs to the community. They didn't make any effort to calculate the benefits. And when she calculated the benefits based on a whole lot of scientific assessments on the value of things like timber, of clean water, of tourism, what she found was that the positive benefits far outweigh the costs. Even though the federal government's allocated $860 million to implement this program, the states just haven't got on with it. And so I think that this is really important research by an undergraduate student that can help inform decision makers on their options for getting on with this. Another important aspect of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan is the recovery of water for the environment. And so originally, the scientific estimate was that over 3,000 gigalitres of water a year was needed to restore the health of these systems. The Basin Plan reduced that figure further, and then in more recent times, the state and federal governments in 2018 have cut the amount of environmental water to be reallocated by 22%. And one of the key reasons for doing that was to keep more water available for farming. So what that does mean is that the environmental water that is available, that is held by Commonwealth Environmental Water Office, needs to be used very strategically to conserve wetlands. Another one of my students, a master's student, Yiwen Chen, has been looking at where the Commonwealth environmental water has gone in the 4 years when there was most environmental water available. So these are her draft results, and these yellow spots show the wetlands that actually received the water to keep them healthy. Unfortunately, what her results indicate is that only around 7% of the wetland area in the basin is being inundated each year, which isn't enough to keep the majority of wetlands alive, and that only around 1% of all the major wetlands in the basin have been receiving managed environmental water. One of the things the government's decided to do was to adopt a series of engineering projects to try and use less water to conserve the same amount of biodiversity. So they have approved 36 projects and allocated $1.1 billion of federal funding to try and build these projects and operate them by 2024. And this program has been used to justify reducing the proportion of environmental water by around 22%. Now these projects, one major component of these projects involves building levee banks around sections of the floodplain and then using canals or pumps to artificially pond the water, lift it out of the river channel and put it on the floodplain to try and mimic a natural flood. Now the governments have said that they're going to build and operate these by 2024 and that at 2024 they will have some sort of audit or reconciliation to see if it works. So I've had 2 students doing some really important research to see are these projects going to deliver the environmental outcomes that they say they're intended to achieve. So Isabel Bender is currently looking at what is the purpose of these projects. And so she's looked at, for example, 9 Victorian engineering projects and calculated that only around 62,000 hectares of these wetlands are included in the projects and less than a quarter of the area of those wetlands would be watered. But when she's compared what the Victorian government's proposing against the Basin Plan, it means that only around 2% of the wetlands in this section of the river would be actively watered. And that these are really expensive projects. They are up to $30,000 a hectare, which makes us wonder whether there are better options for use of this public money. It's particularly concerning that these projects don't meet the kinds of environmental objectives of the Basin Plan, which the Murray-Darling Basin Authority itself has acknowledged. Another one of my students, Yulan Yu, is looking at how you would actually evaluate these projects to see if they delivered value for money. And the governments have said they will evaluate the projects, but they haven't said how. So are they only going to do it on the basis of the inputs, whether the money was spent in time, or on the outputs, whether the infrastructure was built and whether it's been used to put water on the wetlands, or hopefully the actual outcomes, whether the projects have been built and whether as a result the environment is healthier. These sorts of questions haven't been actively discussed publicly before. And so here are a number of undergraduate students exploring critical issues for our society about the expenditure of billions of dollars of public funds, exploring to see whether they are going to produce the kinds of benefits that our governments have promised and help our governments hopefully make better decisions in basin reform. And so, to my mind, this body of research shows how important it is that scientists speak truth to power. I believe that scientists have an obligation to ensure that their knowledge is available to the community that funds them, a view that I think has been well expressed by the late Professor Peter Cullen. And for this reason, I think that it's important that ANU continues to explore these contested policy issues of science and management. So how do we then undertake this research in a way that might help inform the decision makers? What we have been doing is undertaking this research in communication with the relevant government agencies, sharing our draft results with them, drawing on their data, and making corrections based on feedback to improve the accuracy of this work. When the research is finalised, when it has been peer reviewed, we will then be communicating our key findings directly with the decision makers, both in government departments, but also some of our political leaders. So let me conclude by saying, addressing the question, can Australia save the Murray-Darling Basin? The Basin Plan that our governments have adopted is a good first step, but it's being poorly implemented. So we could save the basin, but we'll need to do a much better job. And this research that my students have been doing shows that there's inadequate official monitoring, and we can't get the right sort of adaptive management unless we're actually measuring what we're planning to manage. There are key elements of good basin river management that are missing so far, such as the reconnecting rivers to the floodplains that I've talked about. I want to highlight here that so many students coming to ANU want to make a difference for society, for the environment, and the four students whose work I've shown here are examples about how you really can tackle real world problems and contribute to a better world. And so I believe that by speaking truth to power through this sort of research, that university researchers are serving the public interest, and I'd certainly welcome any students coming to ANU with an interest in this area to contribute to this work. Look, thank you for listening. I'd love to now hear your questions and discuss this further.
Thanks so much for that, Jamie. We did have a question. I suppose it's more of a comment. Hi, Jamie. I did a legal research assignment on the poor management of the basin last year. So glad to see that the ANU is continuing to do important research to fix the problem of the basin. That's from Jess.
Fantastic, Jess. Great to hear from you. And it's such an important area that we need to maintain this work.
If you have any questions, put them in the chat box. But I might just ask one. Jamie, would you be able to just briefly talk about some of the classes and courses which you actually take, where you speak to students, undergraduate or postgraduate, about these issues?
Yes, I convene a first year course, ENVS 1001, called Environment and Society, where we explore these questions about how do societies make decisions about how to manage the environment? What is the role of science? And how can we help societies make more sustainable decisions? And that's in the first semester each year. That flows on into another class here in the Fenner School, ENVS 1008, Sustainable Development, which is convened by Associate Professor Lorraine van Kerkhoff. And that really explores a whole lot of issues around the global development situation. How have the world's governments made decisions around sustainable development? What are the rules? How can it be implemented? In later years, students have got a fantastic array of courses that they can do. So we have, for example, at the Fenner School, two 2 field schools, at least when we're allowed to travel, one in Fiji and one in Vietnam, where students can travel to those countries and spend time with local people and explore what sustainable development really means in practice. In terms of water, we have at the Fenner School a couple of water science and management courses that Dr. Sarah Beavis leads there. There are some great courses in other schools across ANU. So, for example, the School of Sociology has one on third world development that is really important when it comes to water. And at the master's level, there are some great courses across ANU in this space. I forgot to mention, Peter, that ANU's got a number of research centres that focus on water. And so for students who are looking to do an honours research project or a PhD project, there's the Water Justice Hub in the Crawford School that's looking at water and Indigenous people's rights. Here in the Fenner School, there's the new Institute for Water Futures that will cover everything from pure science and hydrology right through to some of the policy questions that I'm involved with. And as part of that, there's also the Water and Landscape Dynamics Centre here at the Fenner School, led by Professor Albert van Dijk, that uses a lot of remote sensing techniques to monitor water and land use change to inform decision making.
Yeah, I suppose the takeaway message there is that the academics and researchers who are doing the science out there are the ones who are teaching as well. So there's a very strong link, which I think we can be pretty proud of at the ANU. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I'll just leave it for a second to see if anything else comes in, but maybe we will wrap it up there, unless there's anything else you'd like to add, Jamie?
Well, great to have you all listen in. If you'd like to follow up, please email me at jamie.pittock@anu.edu.au. Love to hear from you. Love to hear from any students interested in undertaking research projects in this area, and just to welcome any prospective students coming to ANU.
Fantastic. And further information on the Fenner School of Environment and Society at the ANU can be found at our website, which I've just put in the chat box as well. All right, thanks so much for joining us, everyone. And I hope you enjoy the rest of our ANU Open Week as well. We've got lots of fantastic sessions, so please check out the website, or you can have a look on our page as well. All right, thank you.